When it comes to creating C# code, we want to have some kind of editor we can write the code into in order to actually create our applications. For this, Microsoft do have a software called Visual Studio, which is great for when it comes to creating C# applications. So going to visualstudio.microsoft.com or clicking the link in the description of this video, you can go ahead and go in and download this piece of software for free. It is a free software, which is great. And we can go ahead and get started with C# once we have this software. I should point out that there's also a software called Visual Studio Code, which is not meant for creating C# applications. It is a text editor that you can use to create websites. So if you want to check out Visual Studio Code for websites, then I do recommend using this software as well, since it's a great software for that purpose. But when it comes to C#, we want to download the one called Visual Studio IDE. So down here at the bottom, you can see we have the Visual Studio IDE download button. You do need to choose the community version if you want it for free. So go ahead and click that one. As you can see, it says 2017. I am actually in 2019 right now, so don't be too bothered about the year that it says down there. So once we're in here, it should automatically download your software, but if it didn't, you can go ahead and click up here to retry. But once you have your software, we can go ahead and just show it in folder and double click it to install it. Now, it will give us a pop-up that you just need to say yes to. And once we're in here, we're just going to go ahead and continue with it. And it will take a while to download because it is quite a big software. So it should take a few minutes for it to actually get started. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut forward to the places where, we don't need to sit and wait for it to just be a download bar. The next thing we need to do is choose what sort of applications we want to create using this program here. As you can see, there's quite a lot to choose from, and you just need to sort of read them to check up on if there's anything special that you're interested in developing. For this specific purpose here, for these tutorials, we will be checking off the first one up here. You can also go ahead and check off the Universal Windows Platform Development. That might be a good one to have as well. If you go down to the bottom here, there is also some game development with Unity. So if you plan to later on do something with Unity, then I do recommend you check off this one as well. If you want to do mobile development using Xamarin, then you can also do that. That is a really popular software or platform in order to create different mobile applications for different types of mobiles. So I'm going to take that one off as well. So with this, I don't think we need to have anything else. Now, I do recommend before continuing that you actually check out how much space are you actually going to be installing on your computer. In my case here, it's going to be 30 gigabyte. And before I click install, I do want to change my install location to maybe my D drive, which has more space than my C drive. So do keep this in mind when it comes to this software, because it does take up a lot of space in your computer. So, just sort of change the install location if you need to do that. Now, regarding actually changing the install location, you can simply go in here and change the C drive to a D drive, and it will automatically ask you if you want to change all the different save locations to the D drive. So you can just go ahead and say yes. And as you can see, all the different paths sort of change, so you can install them in the correct location. Now, after clicking install, you might get this pop-up here, and I just want to explain what exactly is going on here. I do have a SSD hard disk as my C drive, and I have a regular hard disk as my D drive. Now, because I asked it to install everything on my D drive, which is going to be a little bit slower performing than my SSD, which, SSDs are faster than hard disks, it's going to ask you about changing the Visual Studio's default location. Because if you install it on a regular hard disk, when you have an SSD drive available, then it's going to perform slightly slower when it comes to actually using the software. So it will ask you if you want to install the actual default program on your C drive or your D drive, depending on the SSD and the hard disk. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and let it install on my C drive, because it is quite a heavy program. So if you have the space for it on your C drive, which in my case is my SSD, then I do recommend you install it on your SSD, because it will improve your performance quite a bit when you use the software. After clicking OK and running the install button again, it will go ahead and start installing all the different settings that we chose inside this Visual Studio application. So you just need to wait for it to get done. This is the longest process because this will take quite a while, but once it's done, you should have Visual Studio installed. After installing Visual Studio, you're going to get this small pop-up here that asks you to actually sign into your Microsoft account. But if you don't have one, or if you just want to do it later, we can go ahead and just skip it. So down here at the bottom, we can say not now, maybe later. Now, this right here is also a very nice little detail, which is that it asks you how you want it to look like when you open up Visual Studio. So if you wanted to have a specific theme, then you can go ahead and choose that. Now, I will go ahead and choose the one called dark, because I know that when people sit in code for a long time, it is a fact that your eyes get tired if you look at a very bright screen. So I'm going to choose the one called dark here in order to get and also to get it to look cooler, because I think dark themes look cooler as well. So we're just going to go ahead and keep it at general for now with the development settings. We're not going to touch any of that, so we're just going to go ahead and start Visual Studio here. Inside Visual Studio, you're going to see a lot of different things, and I just want to tell you not to get confused about what you see in here. A lot of people might get a little bit frightened the first time they see the program because there is a lot of things in here, but you won't be using most of these things that you see. So just go ahead and calm down and sort of follow what I'm doing here, because trust me, you're not going to be using a lot of these things here. What we're going to do is we're going to be creating console applications in this tutorial course here. I know you can create cool things like mobile apps and you can create games and a lot of different things, but when it comes to learning the actual C# language as a language, a good thing to do is just develop console applications to practice. And I know this might not sound that exciting, but it is sort of the best way to learn C#, as a language. And you're also going to notice that a lot of people that teach C# are going to be doing console applications with you, because it is just in general the best way to do it. So we're going to build our first application here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go up to File, we're going to go to New, and then we're going to say New Project. In here, it is going to ask you about what kind of project you want to develop. And you can see we get a bunch of different options on the side here. And depending on what you install when you set up your Visual Studio, when we did actually have to tick off all the different things, it is going to have different things in here. What we are going to make is a console application. So make sure you go under Visual C#, not Visual C++, because you might do that by accident. Go under Visual C#, go to Get Started, and then choose Console Application. At the bottom here, we're going to fill out a little bit of information. Name is going to be the name for your project. And what is important to know about when you create a C# application is that you have something called a solution and you have something called a project name. A solution is an overall category for many different projects. So the solution down here, at least to begin with, we're not going to worry too much about, because we're just going to have one specific solution name that might as well just match our project name. But in some examples, you might have a very large project that has a lot of different projects under one solution. So just for now, we're just going to go and stick with the name down here. We can call something else besides Console App 1, because that doesn't sound very exciting. Let's call it First Project. And as you can see, it also automatically changes the solution, and we can also go ahead and change the location for it. So if you want to do that, we can go and browse it and just choose a different location, just somewhere on your computer. So once we have this, we can just go ahead and click OK. And once we do that, it is going to load up the first project for us. And after it does that, I will go ahead and explain what exactly is going on inside the project, because you will have some default things to start with. So as you can see, we have quite a few different things here, and I should probably increase the font size so you can actually see what is going on in here. Let me just do that for a second. I have never actually increased the font inside this software here because I never needed to, but because I'm making videos for YouTube, it's probably a good idea to increase the font. So if you're interested in knowing how to do that, you need to go up to Tools, then go down to Options, then it's going to open up a option menu. In here, it's going to be in general as a default. And there you can also change the theme if you did actually decide to change the theme to another color, if you didn't like the dark theme or the blue theme. But in order to change the fonts, you need to go down to Fonts and Colors, and in here you can increase the font size. So right now it's set to 10. So I might set to something like 18 and just see what that does for it. So as you can see, whoa, it became really big. So this might be good for a tutorial course, I think. This is big enough for you to actually see what I'm doing. So as you can see, there's a lot of things going on in here, and I don't want you to get intimidated by all the different windows, and there's a lot of different code already existing inside our document. So let me just go and explain what exactly is in here. To do that, let's go ahead and ignore this project here for now, because this is the main file that we will be working in, but let's just ignore that for now and skip over to the Solution Explorer, which is over here on the right side. This is the actual project that you're working in, because there will be different files, and the one that we have here is just the main file that we're going to actually write C# code into. Over here on the side, you can see we have something called our first project, which is the project that we have here, and then we have a solution up here called First Project, because like I said, we will have a solution, which is the top category with different projects under it. So we can also see the solution over here on the right side. Now inside our actual project, which is down here, we have something called Properties. Inside Properties, we have a file called assemblyinfo.cs. If I were to click it, you can see we have a bunch of information in here. Now what this basically is is when we compile our application, it creates a executable file. And this executable file is going to have some information in it, you know, like a type of identifier that will actually let people know what exactly this project is. So as you can see, we can fill out different information, like, for example, what is the title of our project? What is the description for it? Different configurations, which company made it, so on, so on, and so on. And down here at the bottom, you can even type what kind of, which version of the project you're creating. So if you created a version 1, and then you later create a version 2, then you can update it down here inside your assembly info. We're not going to be touching that for now. This is something you can do if you at a later point want to create an actual project. So for now, we're just not going to touch this one. So closing that back down, we're going to go down to where it says references. In here, you're going to see we have a bunch of assemblies, which is a bunch of reference to, like I said, different assemblies that contain classes that we might use inside our project or inside our application. All these different assemblies are going to have different classes inside of them, which we can, if we want to, refer to in order to perform very specific functions or methods inside our application. So we might not even use any of these, but we might use some of them. It really depends on the application we're trying to build here. But I don't want you to get too confused about this section here, because it just contains classes we might use at some point later on. Then the next thing we have here is the app config file, and the app config file is just basically a configuration file. So if you want to add some configuration to your applications, you can add it in here, for example, connection to a database or something else. You can do that inside this XML file. And as you can probably tell, it is an XML file, it is not a C# file, which I should probably mention here. The last one down here at the bottom is going to be our program.cs. CS stands for C#, because we can't use hashtag inside our file names. So CS is C# as an extension. That's probably a good idea to mention that. So in here you can see we have our actual file. And this is what we had to begin with when we opened up the project. In here, you're going to see many different things. And let me just go and explain what exactly is going on in here. At the top here, the first thing you're going to see is that we have a bunch of different links, and these are actually links to different namespaces which contains classes, methods, and properties that we may or may not use inside our project. You will actually notice that the first link up here is actually lighting up, whereas the other ones are grayed out, and that's because right now, when we started up the first project, it does give us some default code, which we don't need. It's just to give us an example of what we can do using C#, which is right down here. And in here, we're actually using some of these different methods from inside the system namespace. So because we're using classes from inside the system namespace, it will actually light up to tell us that we're using this specific namespace here. This means that these right here are not being used, and we could essentially just delete them because we're not using them. You will actually notice that we won't actually be using most of these namespaces inside our project. So we will or will not, depending on the project, just delete the namespaces that we're not using. To make this much more simple to look at, let's go ahead and delete the default code that it is giving us when we start a new project, just because it wants to show us what exactly you can do. Let's go ahead and delete that to make it much more simple. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove it here. And as you can see, now we have a much more simple application that doesn't have a bunch of gibberish that we don't actually need to have. Down here below the links to the namespaces, you can see we have some more code going on. The first one up here simply tells us what kind of namespace we're inside of right now. So right now, because we created a namespace called first project, which was the name of the project here, there will be classes and there will be methods and properties inside these curly brackets here that belong to this namespace. And now don't get too confused about me saying namespaces, classes, properties, methods. Just know that the namespace that we have here called first project, which was the project we actually created when we created our first project, is a over category that contains many different classes inside of it. So it is just a type of container. Inside our namespace, you can also see we have a class called program, and program is just the default name for the first class we get inside any kind of new project inside Visual Studio. Now a class is a type of container which will contain a bunch of methods and properties. Now, if you don't know what a method and property is, it is a little bit similar to variables and functions if you come from a web development background. Now, I do know we also have properties and methods and classes in web development, but for people who's never done any sort of object-oriented programming before, look at these as a little bit similar to variables and functions. I know it's not the same, but that's the closest relations I can give for new people to understand what exactly these are. So class is basically a category. We can, for example, have a class that is called person, and then we have a bunch of properties inside of it that says what the name of the person is, what is his age, is it a he or she, is it something else, and then we might have a method which kind of works like a function that just simply runs some kind of code that does something with the information about the person. For example, when a year passes, it could recalculate the age of the person and change it into something else. That will be a method that belongs to the class called person. So that is just a short explanation of what exactly a class is. I know it's not a good explanation, but I hope it sort of gave you an idea about what exactly a class is. Inside our class, we have a method called main. So the name that we have right in front of the parentheses here are going to be the name for the method. Do notice that it is uppercased. That is important. When we create our methods, we do uppercase the name. So do bear that in mind later on. Inside the parentheses, we can pass in arguments if we want to. In this case here, as a default, it will have some arguments passed in here. And I'm not going to cover what exactly these arguments are here in this episode here. In front of the method, we also have two other keywords. The first one is something called static. And we're going to get more into what exactly static methods are. But it just simply means that you can't instantiate this specific item that we have inside the class here. So we will talk more about this later on. Void means that we can't return a value from this specific method. To explain what exactly void means, let me actually go and give you an example. Let's say I have a friend that wants to tell me a secret. Now, when he tells me the secret, he yells it out to me, and as soon as I hear it, I forget about it. And that's because I can't remember what he told me. So when we say we have a void method, it simply means that we can't return any sort of value and remember it. So if I were to write something inside this method here, I can write it out inside the console application that we're creating, but I can't remember what I wrote out in the console application. Whereas if I were to delete the void, then we can actually return a value from inside this method here. Again, this is a hard concept to grasp for a second episode. I just looked at my arm like there was a clock on it. Just don't worry too much about static and void for now, because we will get more into it a little bit later on in some future episodes. So just know that this specific method here is what is getting run once we run our application. So let's actually try and run our application, because right now you can see we have nothing going on inside our method here. So if I were to click Control F5, which is the shortcut for running the application, you can see that it starts loading up something down here. As you can see, we get a console. This is what a console looks like. There's no sort of graphic interface to confuse you in any sort of way when we create something. So we can only focus on the C# code, which is sort of nice because we're just focusing on learning C#. In here, you can see it just says press any key to continue. There's not actually anything going on in here because we haven't done anything inside our application. So if we were to click something, it just closes down. If we were to go inside the actual method and do something, once we do actually load up the application, I could, for example, run a console method. So we're going to say console dot, and then you're going to notice it actually gives us suggestions to different types of things we can do using this specific keyword here. So at the bottom here, you can see we have a method called writeLine. That is one you will need to remember because that one is important. We're going to use that plenty of times from now on. So writeLine is a method, so we need to include parentheses and a semicolon at the end here, because we do want to close off every single line of code with a semicolon. In between writeLine, we're just going to write double quotes, and then we're going to write some kind of text. Now, this is called a string when we include quotes and then write text inside of it. This is a data type that we can actually use inside C# and many other languages such as PHP and so on. We're going to get more into that a little bit later on, but just know for now we're writing a piece of text. So I could write something like, hi there, parenthesis, exclamation mark. If we were to run this after saving it, of course, Control F5, you can see it says hi there inside the console. So we're starting to do something using our application here. And I know it's a very simple application, but it is just to sort of give you an idea about how to set up our software and how to get started using Visual Studio. And that was everything I wanted to show you for this episode here. Again, don't get intimidated by all I said in this episode because there was quite a lot of information. I don't expect you to remember everything. So for now, just go ahead and try and soak it in. Try to digest what I just said. Maybe rewatch the video if there were some things you were a little bit confused about. And just hang in there. We will get to a point where you will learn C#. Everything's going to be fine. If you had an easy time with this, then just good for you. Just know that some people might not have an easy time with it. So you will get there. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.